Fascinating stuff. Let's return, though, to Canada and to some of the big talking points from the weekend. Again, I'm with Craig Scarborough. Well, Scars, we've talked about it already in the show, the very different character of Montreal this year because of the extra DRS zone. And let's talk about that more in detail and graphically, how the car compared with last year.
Well, obviously, at a high-speed circuit, normally you would want to run as little wing as possible to reduce drag to get the speed on the straights. This third DRS zone has meant teams haven't had to sacrifice straight-line speed as much. And as you can see here, you look first of all at the 2017 wing, very much twisted shape, even if we ignore the T-wing mounted ahead of it. Not very much downforce from that, and they're really trying to reduce the drag by narrowing the wing at the wingtips. Then, when you look at what they're running this year, it's just a conventional wing. I mean, they're not even especially low downforce settings. Probably medium downforce would be the best way to describe it. So a straight wing, still producing plenty of drag, but obviously when the DRS opens and the flap lifts up, all of that drag goes away. So the teams are very much relying on the underbody downforce along the straights and for that initial stability into corners.
Well, Sebastian Vettel making the point that Canada wasn't boring in the context of what we might be seeing in the World Cup in a few weeks, and I agree with them 100% on that one, of course. But in the meantime, new barge boards on the Ferrari.
Well, you won't be getting any World Cup analysis from me at all, and I didn't even know it was starting.
Good.
But the Ferrari, two big sets of updates for them this weekend. Key one, aerodynamically, was the barge boards. You could tell because they were all painted black, so we couldn't see the detail. But all of the little fins and the flicks along the floor have all been multiplied even more as we see with everyone as they start to bring their updates. So that's quite an important update added to the floor updates that we've had over the past couple of races as well. So Ferrari working really hard there then. And also, it's the race where they were able to bring their new power unit. Only Vettel got the full package, which is the engine, the turbo, the MGU-H. Kimi didn't get the V6 engine, obviously he's a step behind on the engine replacements. So that was a good step for them. But then we saw intercooler problems for them. And this manifested itself most obviously for Romain Grosjean at the beginning of qualifying. As you see, as he came out of his pit garage, smoke everywhere. At first, we weren't quite sure what this was, and it transpires it was actually the turbo intercooler, which is effectively the radiator that cools the air that's been heated as it's compressed by the turbocharger before it goes back into the engine. And we can actually see, if we just flick over here, the intercooler that Ferrari run, made by an Italian company called Mezzo.
And just to be clear, identical to that on the factory cars, right?
Yep. And Kimi Raikkonen's actually had his changed in Parc Ferme because they found the same problem with his intercooler. So what this is effectively is a water-jacketed intercooler. Normally an intercooler is just like a radiator where the air passes through the fins and then the cooling air passing through the side pods cools that down.
Right.
Ferrari since 2014 have had this Mezzo setup where you have a water jacket around those air tubes and then there's a separate radiator cools that down. This failed, so not only did you have all of the air blowing out from the turbocharger, but it was blowing through all of this water, which is why there was such a huge plume of vapour coming from behind the car and obviously somewhat handicapped Romain Grosjean's weekend.
Who, as we said, went on actually to drive a very, very good race as a result of starting at the back of the grid. Yeah.
And the Haas itself has obviously gone through updates, so you know, we'll just sort of bring the car up there. Since Monaco, in fact, since testing in Spain, they've started to bring little updates, so there were some changes to the front wings. We've also seen the halo now doesn't have those little teeth on it, which we saw at the start of the season. Much more a conventional vane that we see over one of the wings around a kind of boomerang shape. And then the barge boards have changed again, stepping even further away from Ferrari, which kind of, you know, gets this conspiracy theory going even further away from fact. They've changed the front of it, then joins the chassis. The X vanes at the side there, which are very unique to Haas, are now joined to the rest of the vanes around the side pods. So big changes for Haas, and they're starting to progress. Not the greatest weekend for them in terms of performance, but I think as we go through the summer, we should see their performance stabilise and come back to where we saw maybe like Melbourne, for example.
Looking at the first lap accident now, another big shunt for Brendan. Poor guy after what happened to him in Barcelona. But anyway, moving on from that, it was a big impact, right?
It was. I mean, it looked very dramatic, and often dramatic accidents aren't actually that big an issue. But when you saw that initial contact when Stroller pushed him over and then he hit the barrier and you saw the tyre marks going up the barrier, the lateral impact of that was incredibly high. You could see his helmet be thrown across the car, and then you obviously have this cockpit padding at the side. Now, this is 100 millimetres thick, and it's not just foam. If you hit it hard, it gets denser and it gets harder to compress.
What G level do you estimate that to be at?
I don't know. I mean, we've seen sort of 20 plus G impacts, in terms of side impacts.
Yeah.
But for the helmet to actually compress all of the foam padding, it must mean that must probably been a little bit higher than this. But we'll wait to see what the FIA come out with on the facts of this.
Part of the circuit, as we were saying last week, dramatically fast, which is why it's such a great place to watch. But things like this can happen. That's all for this week's show, sadly. We'll be back again next week with our usual spirited look at what has transpired recently in the world of motorsport. But in the meantime, let's record for posterity the huge crowd that celebrated Switzerland's return to the international racing calendar last weekend and Lucas di Grassi's win in the factory Audi. It was an auspicious occasion from beginning to end.